Living environment friends, it's a time for another Tuesday and another Bellringer. And of course, we're looking at things that are very, very small with microscopes. Things like cells. All right, let's do this. All right. Hey now. Mr. Kovacs class. It's Mr. Kovacs class. You might learn a ton. It's Mr. Kovacs class.
It's interesting too.
It's Mr. Kovacs class. And he's super cool. It's Mr. Kovacs class. Cells are small. Right, to go into the realm of cells, we've got to go really small, smaller than a grain of rice, right? Smaller than the dot on the I of the Times regular font. Right, we got to get smaller than a sesame seed, smaller than a grain of salt. Once we get below a grain of salt, we get to some cells. Like the biggest cells there are some protists called amoebas. Amoebas are pretty big cells. And there you have friends, paramecium cells. They are big eukaryotic cells. The biggest human cells you can see are egg cells, which are funny because they're only really like half cells. We'll talk about why. They're not even full cells. But we'll talk about why that is later. But most human cells are much smaller. Right, like a skin cell that you're going to look at in lab, 30 microns. Right, a rod cell found in your eyeball is like 100 microns. We get even closer. Blood cells even smaller. Okay? Sperm cells even smaller. Yeast cells really small. And then once we get below yeast cells, we can start seeing the size of subcellular things like mitochondrion, right? Mitochondria is about the same size as a bacterial cell, right? We see some other cell parts. Chromosomes we'll learn about. This is the X chromosome, the biggest chromosome. It's pretty big, right? It's bigger than a mitochondrion. Lysosomes, other cell parts. And then we get into the realm of viruses, which are really small. And finally, individual proteins, antibodies, phospholipids, glucose molecules, and then finally, the smallest thing on our list here is a water molecule, right? Teeny tiny. Small. So we're going to be studying cells, of course, right? And the parts of cells is what we're interested in. Yesterday you got introduced to cells as a city, and you learned some of the parts of the cells like the mitochondria, the Golgi apparatus, lysosomes, ribosomes, those kinds of things. We're going to talk more about that in class today. Right? It's interesting to learn scale of cells, because when we think of things as meters, and then when we get to centimeters, we're pretty small, and millimeters, about as small as we get. In cells, we're dealing with micrometers, 1/1,000,000th of a meter. And then we get smaller than cells into individual cell parts. We're dealing with nanometers, 1/1000,000th of a meter. And then when we're getting to really small things like wavelengths of light, we're talking about angstroms, 10/10,000,000th of a meter. So we're going to be hanging out in the realm of micrometers, micrometers, 1/1,000,000th. Meter. Right here's a typical cell, and you can see inside of it all the different organelles. And so that's our goal today in class, is to learn a typical cell. What are the different organelles found inside the cell? All right, you already know some, like you know mitochondria, right? You know what a mitochondria does. So we're going to introduce you to some other things like ribosomes and lysosomes and Golgi bodies in the nucleus and that kind of thing. So that's what we're going to study in class today. All right, so we're ready to study cells today. We're into the realm of the really small. And so let's have a great day here in science class. And don't forget, your midterm exam is like a week away. Good coffee.